Well, welcome to question 84 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is adoration, and I am Dr. Thibault. We're looking at adoration. We're dealing with the area of justice, for one, looking at the potential parts of justice, which include religion, and under religion are external acts, external manifestations. And in that section, we include adoration, which is an external um, uh, reverence towards God. Previously, in questions 83 and 84, we looked at the internal reverences towards God, prayer and devotion. So we moved on to a new section. The external acts of latria, which is that supreme worship which we offer to God alone, is in adoration, question 84. We also look at external things offered to God. This includes things like sacrifice and tithing. There's a number of uh, ideas available in there. And then finally, it looks to something which belongs to God, uh, which God is assumed. Uh, this includes things like praise and later on the sacraments. Um, this was a very straightforward one, just looking at adoration. So adoration, according to Article 1 that we're looking at, adoration is an act of latria and religion. So it is directed to the reverence of the person adored. The person adored is God. So therefore, it's an act of latria and adoration. Uh, Whereby we adore God is an act of religion, since it's giving due justice to God. It's an attempt to give justice to God. It's based out of love and directed through religious practice. Therefore, it is an element. It is a act of religion, the virtue of religion. Now, when we look at what do we do with adoration? Adoration in terms of latria, that supreme worship of God alone, is to God alone. The only appropriate way of having latria. Now, there is also, we pray to saints, as we covered in question 83 on prayer, but we don't pray to saints through latria. We we can either ask for the saints to intercede on our behalf, which is intercessory prayer, but then just to pray in terms of honoring the saints, we use the term dulia, which is to excellent creatures, but it has the significance of sweetness, right? Dulia deals with sweetness. So it's the sweetness of the saints that we offer versus latria, which is worship to God. We have this, St. Thomas doesn't talk about it, but we have this third category of um, reverence towards the Blessed Virgin Mary, which we call hyperdulia. So extreme, higher, higher sweetness. The reference we have for the Virgin Mary. So it's quite clear, though, for anyone who's somewhat confused that Catholics worship Mary. Well, they don't latria Mary. They dulia Mary. They might hyperdulia Mary, but it's still dulia. And there's a big difference between dulia and latria. There's a big difference between worship and respect for their sweetness. Um, and we look at the actions of the body, because these are, again, external acts. We already looked at internal acts, so these are external acts. So we're dealing with the body. So is adoration external then? Well, St. Thomas says, well, if we look to the human nature, humans have a twofold nature. They have the intellectual and they have the sensible, body and soul. Because human beings are body and soul. Their adoration includes their whole being, right? To adore God is to give God our whole being. So therefore, we must give God both all of our soul and all of our body. Um, so the internal devotion is called spiritual adoration. So there's an internal movement of the will to spiritual adoration, but then there's also external, exterior humbling of the body, which is bodily adoration. So adoration involves both the body and the spirit. Now, if adoration really were just entirely spiritual adoration, that would probably fall under devotion and prayer and be part of the internal movement of the will. This would be more like questions 82 and 83 if it were only an interior disposition, interior acts. An exterior act requires some additional level of humbling of the body, um, kneeling, lying prostrate, any type of bodily way of showing humility would be a form of adoration. I think maybe we might get confused by this now, especially if you're a student who's watching this video. We tend to think of adoration as what we do to the Blessed Sacrament, right? So we have adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, um, but what St. Thomas is talking about is a more general adoration. Here's the guy who wrote the Pange Lingua. He's kind of known for adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, but that's not entirely what he's talking about here. He is talking about adoration of God, which could be through the Blessed Sacrament, but not limited to the adoration to the Blessed Sacrament. Right? We even have that term, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Right? That's a type of adoration. There could be also adoration of God outside of adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Maybe more complicated on how to do that, but it doesn't seem like it's an impossibility, according to St. Thomas. Um, External adoration with our body, does require first the interior movement of spiritual adoration. If one is sitting, if we say adoration of the Blessed Sacrament as an example, if we were to be sitting in the church, if we don't have an internal spiritual disposition, we don't have a spiritual act of adoration, then our bodies being present in the room isn't doing anything. This St. Thomas talked about in question 83 about attention. You know, what attention has to be given, and attention has to be given. It's not enough to be in the building. You have to have a movement of the will and the intellect. Um, so if we have this spiritual adoration of our minds, and then we add to it the bodily adoration, now that's good, right? Now we're praying with our body and soul. Sometimes, though, it's fair enough. Mentally, we're not there, and our bodies, though, by kneeling or being prostrate, it gets us into the mental prayer. So it can go either. It can go back and forth. Um, um, Spiritual leads to the bodily, and the bodily can help lead to the spiritual. It doesn't have to be in one direction. Although the cause for both is God Himself, right? God's invitation to prayer, the grace to pray, um, is the start of it all. The place of adoration. Now, this is again, if we were simply talking about adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, this would be somewhat straightforward and maybe a matter of rubrics. But this is really, I think he's talking in a broader sense of adoration. So let's look at it. So he uses in the contra argument, my house shall be called a house of prayer. So he's starting with the argument that space matters, the space matters, that there is a particular place to God. Um, Now, St. Thomas says the mind internally apprehends God as not comprised in a place, while bodily signs must of necessity be of some definite place and position. So, can the mind pray to God anywhere? Of course, right? Is God limited um, to any particular place? No, God's not limited. Uh, Maybe this next line helps with this. A definite place is chosen for adoration, not on account of God who is adored as though he were enclosed in a place, but on account of the adorers. Um, so it doesn't matter where you adore in some sense, but what he's pointing out in that later part of the sentence, in both of those sentences, is since we are made up of bodies, we are always in a place, right? God is not always in a place since God is every place, but we are limited to a place. So the place matters because we will be in a place. There will be a time and a place when this takes place. Therefore, the time and place matters to help lead the person to be a proper adorer. Now, Thomas gets into this when he talks about the places of adoration, and this is the response to one in Article 3. Three reasons why a place is proper for adoration. Because a place is consecrated, so greater devotion, and it is more likely to be heard. The prayer is more likely to be heard, and it's a place of greater devotion. That's probably not so popular nowadays to say, well, God hears our prayers better when we're in church than when we're not. Probably people wouldn't like that much, but St. Thomas is saying, this place has been consecrated for prayer. Therefore, it is more fitting for prayer. Um, it is more the house of God. Therefore, God hears the prayers more. And the example St. Thomas gives is of the temple, right? Solomon's temple. Why build a temple if God is everywhere and God can do everything and God doesn't need a temple? Well, God has called for this temple in some sense, right? He didn't want David to build the temple, but he did want Solomon to build the temple. And it was a place that was to be a house of God. So if we look at the temple, the temple was built for a particular purpose, and it was to become a place of prayer, a place of communion with God. The Holy of Holies was for the high priest to enter. Now, in the age of Christ and the Holy Spirit, we don't lose the holiness of the temple. Every church becomes the temple, right? Our bodies become the temple. Um, the holiness hasn't gone away; it's increased. It hasn't decreased. Um, so there is a particular thing about the space. Uh, the other two also help add to this. The place of adoration is I think what he was really talking about is churches or shrines, or oratories, things of that nature. Uh, Within it, they have the signs of mysteries and the holiness within them. So they have the Blessed Sacrament present. They have images of the saints. They have the Stations of the Cross. They have candles which were lit out of devotion. They have the smell of incense and the smell of beeswax candles and the stained glass window, right? All of these elements, holy water and baptismal font, right? All of this is signs of mystery to help us to adore God better, right? Could we adore God in a McDonald's? Sure. Is it easier to adore God in a beautiful cathedral? Probably. That's why we built it to look like and we didn't build it to look like a McDonald's. Because if people could pray better in a McDonald's, we would have built it to look like a McDonald's. But things like beauty help elevate the senses to contemplate the mysteries of God. So therefore, it would be a better choice. Um, uh, the concourse of many adores, therefore, more likely to we are the prayers are more likely to be heard. Now, this is another one that's probably more controversial today that people probably wouldn't like that much. But this idea that, well, if you're praying in the church and other people are praying in the church, the fact that multiple people are praying in the church makes your prayers more likely to be heard and listened to. Because you have a multitude of voices of prayer. It's a house of prayer. When you're looking at a picture of the country, you're looking at it at night, and you can see the major cities all lit up. You can see, oh, there's Boston, there's New York, and there's Chicago, and LA, right? You can see the lights all kind of like a starfishing out from these major sites. The same type of imagery within a house of prayer, right? A house of prayer is kind of lighting up. So, can God hear prayers anywhere? Yes, and He will. But will God listen more to the voluminous voices of the crowd calling out in prayer? Yes, according to St. Thomas, yes. And St. Thomas uses to defend this idea line from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. Where there are two or three gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. So to pray among other people praying in His name, He's more present. Right? It may seem, well, if Christ is everywhere, how can Christ be more present if He's everywhere? But in a metaphorical sense, in a spiritual sense, you know, uh, in a prayerful sense, He said it, so He must intend it to be true. So why do we go to church again? I know this is the summary and we just covered it, but the place has been consecrated for the purpose of prayer. So God listens to the consecration, right? It is consecrated for that. Um, it's filled with images of mysteries and the holy and items and images of holiness, which will elevate our souls to be better adorers. Um, and we are praying amongst other people, which adds to the the nature of the prayer. It adds to the voice of the prayer. The voice becomes louder because you're praying among other prayers. So, in conclusion, um, adoration is an act of latria, which is an act of um, religion, the religious aspect. It's out of love of God. Um, you can also have some sense of it in a lesser sense, Julia for the saints, but really latria, adoration is intended for God alone. Adoration is both an internal act and an external act. Right? The Lord calls us. We have an internal call act towards prayer, and then it leads to an external manifestation of that prayer. Sometimes, though, physical leads us back to the spiritual, right? So they kind of can go back and forth and hand in hand, but in both senses, their origin is in God alone. Um, Adoration requires a definite place because wherever you perform adoration, you're doing it somewhere. You can't do it without a physical uh, place. And because you can't do adoration except in a physical way, um, you can, if you're getting down on your knees to pray, it's better to do that in front of the Eucharist or in front of an image of the cross, in front of something that brings you to holiness. Right? That is, to do it in a consecrated space in a consecrated way within the community of the believers who are also in prayer, it is more powerful than just doing it alone. If you were just to do it in a spiritual sense, then you're talking about prayer and not adoration. Adoration lends itself to a certain materiality, which really is what distinguishes adoration from just prayer or devotion. So I hope that helps. In the next topic, at question 85, we'll move on to sacrifice.